Who's hanging young hero besides your head and spirit? That soul is saying something profound, so let them hear it.
Welcome to Giant Size Violence, a Toku Comics podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, and today I'm joined by a man who's filled just about every role in the comics industry you can imagine, having worked as a writer, editor, colorist, and cover artist on dozens of books over the last 15 years. He's written for some of the most famous DC comic titles, including The Flash, Detective Comics, Injustice, and the legendary comics crossover title, Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. He's also written for creator-owned titles like Sons of the Devil, Midlife, or How to Hero at 50, and Chicken Devil. And he's co-writing the Massiverse title, No One, alongside Kyle Higgins. Here to discuss his first foray into the world of Tokusatsu comics, as well as his ongoing indie titles, is today's guest, Brian Buccellato. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, glad you can be here.
Yeah, of course.
So I know you've got a lot of exciting books coming out month to month right now, and I'm looking forward to getting into those, but I was hoping we could start off with talking about one of your earlier comics.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so I actually came across your work in one of the first podcast episodes I ever recorded back on a New 52 book club style podcast a friend and I tried to do, and Flash was one of the books we got to cover, and I remember even back then being blown away by the panel work of that book, and the writing I really enjoyed as well, but the panel specifically and the art style was unlike anything I'd seen before or since, really. And I hadn't really seen very often like the artist and the colorist both being on the writing team before. And so I'd really love to know what the creative process behind that book was like and how some of those really experimental panel layouts came to be.
Sure. I mean, all credit to Francis Manapul, the obviously the visualist, co-writer on the book with me, and the person responsible for just the really creative, innovative layouts. I think I had been Francis's colorist at the time because I colored comics for like 20 years. And in that time, I met Francis at Top Cow, and we worked on The Witchblade for a couple of years, and we became very good friends. And then he moved on to DC, and I think a couple of years in, I got the opportunity to color him again, by request. And so we did a little run with Jeff Johns writing. I think it was like maybe 6 to 8 issues of Flash. I don't even remember how many it was. And then the New 52 thing happened, and they actually offered him the gig to write and draw the book himself. But him obviously being a good friend of mine and knowing my background, I basically taught myself to write over the course of 10 years, wanting to be a screenwriter, which I was doing on the side while, raising a family and, coloring comic books to pay the rent and stuff. And so, he was familiar with my work, and he had never written anything, especially not like in comics like published before. And so he asked me if I would co-write it with him, since I was already going to be coloring it. And that sort of just like blew the doors open for my career, because I went from being a guy who had scripts, who was some nobody colorist that nobody would read their scripts, to the co-writer of Flash. And that's what got me like, an agents and reps and stuff like that. So that's how it happened. So I owe so much to Francis. This is a podcast, so you won't see it, but like this piece of Flash art is a Francis original. It was supposed to be the cover to issue 3, but Dan DiDio shit canned it. So I feel like I have the only copy.
That's awesome.
Of that cover. I think it was issue 3. Yeah. And so that's how it happened. But as far as process goes, it was just a lot of Zoom, a lot of, I think it was pre-Zoom. So a lot of FaceTime, I think it was. And a lot of talking things out. And we had a very interesting process, because he would actually do like layouts while we're talking. And so a lot of times we actually would have the layouts before we had the script. Which was very, very different in terms of process. It's
like Marvel style there.
It was like even one step beyond almost, right? Because we would then have to go back, and I would paste in the pages, and then we would describe what's in the layouts. And so that was a really interesting process. I've never seen it done, since or before, but that was a really cool process for us. But in terms of like just a panel choice and like integrating logos, all that stuff, those are choices that Francis made, very early on. And I just was along for the ride, to be honest with you. Like, he was doing ink washes then, traditionally. And I just got to be, the the person who got to go along for the ride and help create, and it was a great experience.
Now, going into that book, as far as the writing goes, like I know that was coming in at a time where there hadn't really been very many modern Barry Allen books yet, and even fewer where he's the only Flash that's active at the time. So was that kind of a daunting feeling going into that on the New 52, or did it feel more freeing, like having that open landscape of stories that hadn't really been done yet?
I think both. So the 6 to 8 issues that we did with Jeff was part of when Jeff brought Barry back into the universe, and so we got a bit of a warm-up period, right? Mm-hmm. Because we got to do those issues with him. So it wasn't like we were reintroducing him. Like that part was already done for us. But it was really daunting because it was the first time, a new number one. Obviously, we all know New 52 did, DC did something they hadn't done before, which is relaunch with new number ones. Immense pressure, obviously, to succeed. Also, as untested writers, and there were probably skeptics out there. So there was a lot of pressure, and what we did was we just channeled it into our writing. Like if you remember, the very first arc had to do with Barry Allen being overwhelmed by the Speed Force. Like we created something called the Speed Mind, and his ability to see all these things at once, but how it paralyzed him. And that was really us writing about how overwhelmed we were, with the sort of honor / task / obligation to really try and stick the landing with this new Barry Allen at the time, new Barry Allen title.
And I feel like most movie speedster depictions have kind of pulled from something similar since then. And I've wondered if were they taken from the Flash directly, or was this just on the forefront of everyone's mind?
I think, to some degree, I think they reference a lot of things. It probably depends on who the showrunner, like the Flash TV show, is, or who the writer of who the producers are on the projects. But in the TV show, I remember when it started, the actor who played Flash reached out and we had a little exchange, and he asked some questions, and I thought it was really cool that they did it. And I was watching Glee at the time, so I knew who he was. Or maybe no one else did, but in the comic world, but I knew who he was. And I thought that was pretty cool that he made that effort. But in terms of pulling from our stuff, I think what we did successfully, and why our run has an evergreen quality to it, because it was easily accessible. We didn't try to reinvent the wheel or retell the origin in a way that we just wanted to take a character and honor everything that came before, and then just tweak little things to update him. We didn't, we weren't trying to make it our own. We were trying to honor Barry Allen, and he has a long, rich history. And so I think we were fairly successful, because it's often pointed to as if you want to start reading Flash, where do you start? I think our run is very easy to get into. And so I think that's sort of a feather in our cap that we were able to do that.
Now, I've seen you handle the first chapter of stories really well, but I've noticed you've also multiple times been put in the position of having to write the middle chapter with very specific beginnings and endings around your work, like with Injustice taking over years 3 through 5 and having to work off someone else's first 2 years, and having a huge video game as the official starting point. And now with the Godzilla X Kong graphic novel you're working on, taking place between the previous movie and the upcoming one. So do you have a method for how you take on stories like this, where you're confined to an established beginning and ending and can only do so much with the characters?
I don't think it's different than any type of writing and storytelling, with the caveat that there are, guardrails, right? Anytime you're getting paid to do something creative, it's not a true art form, right? It's commercial art. Someone else gets to ultimately decide whether what you did is what they want, or if they want, changes. And you can always defend things creatively, and you hope that you have good relationships with the people that are involved and the people that are paying you, that if there's something you truly believe in, you can fight for that thing. But sometimes it's contract says you can't use this character. Okay. Editorial's using this character for this other thing. Okay. So really what you're doing is all you're doing is you're seeing what are the parameters, what's the box that I'm in. And then it becomes creative problem solving. That's what it always was for me. It's a challenge, but it's sort of creative math. You know what I mean? Injustice, you're backing up from the game. We already know what's going to happen. We already know who's alive there. But whoever is, not in the game, they were fair game to do something with, So that was the opportunity that were presented because of it. So yeah, I don't know if it's any different. It's just it's a different muscle that you flex.
Mm-hmm. As far as the character limitations elsewhere, I think one of the most impressive things about Godzilla versus Justice League versus Kong, like, is the number of characters you've crammed in there. Like, with just the title alone, you've got two of the most famous monsters of all time, and then a whole team of some of the biggest heroes of all time. And yet, you're also throwing in the Injustice League and the Bat Family and assorted other heroes. So, like, how do you go about balancing a book with an ever-increasing cast? And, like, what made you go that route instead of just trying to keep it contained to the titular characters?
Honestly, I don't know. I went overboard. Like, I literally just went overboard. Like, I was having so much fun coming up with stuff that I just kept adding and made my life harder and harder and harder. But, still, I mean, I think Injustice was sort of the training wheels for this in some ways, because I had the whole cast in Injustice. So I learned to deal with an enormous cast, and you have to sort of get in and get out each of these scenes to service everyone and hopefully do it credibly in a way that's interesting to the reader. And so I think I learned a lot on Injustice that I was able to carry over to this. And then I don't know why. I mean, in hindsight, maybe I could have used less characters, but like, things happen, you know what I mean? Like, you're in a position where you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great if this happened? Oh, and like with the giant monsters, like, certain characters are more like, you want to do something with them. Like, you want Batman to build a giant mech, you know what I mean, to fight against him. So, like, you add those things in, and then you just got to figure out how to make it work.
Now, one of the things I've noticed helping with that larger cast is your use of banter in the book. Like, normally when I see any excessive amount of banter in a book, like, it kind of takes me out of it or makes it feel almost dated for me. But even reading the first issue, I noticed a difference with this, that, like, every little comment added in there, like, actually adds something to the scene or fleshes out the characters and their dynamics with each other. So I'm curious what you would say is, like, the key to writing good banter for a modern comic.
I mean, I really think it's you have to be self-aware, right? Like, you have to be in on the joke to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I think comics, especially superhero comics, because, like, I don't even know how to get into it without like a larger conversation about the sort of like deconstructing myth and all sorts of kind of stuff. But like, you have to be able to take it seriously and not be able to take it serious, because at the end of the day, there's a suspension of disbelief, right? People are flying, they're picking up cars, they're shooting laser beams out of their eyes. There's 400-foot lizards. Like, there's all these buy-ins, and I think if you take everything so super seriously, the reader has nowhere to let go, like, to release. You know what I mean? It's like a movie that's so tense that, like, you don't end up enjoying it, because like the whole time you're like this, like Uncut Gems. I love that movie. I don't watch it very often because it's just so fucking tense, Pardon my cursing.
Now you can swear away on this show.
Yeah. So I think the key is really, there's two things. One is to have fun while you're respecting the world and the canon and all that other kind of stuff. And you're not going to be able to please everyone, right? Like, people will get upset at you no matter what you do. So you just have to get that out of your mind, because not everyone views the characters the same way, right? You have 75 years of history. You have people who, it's their beloved character. Like, that's another thing. Like, there's such an intimate connection between comics and the fan, because they get to control the pace and they hold this thing, and they can stare at a panel for hours, and their mind can go off, and they can go read all these back issues. It's like a medium, unlike any other, in so many ways, that, like, there's a sense of ownership that the fans get that I think they don't, I think all genre fans can be that way, like hyper, like mine, how dare you mess with canon. I think comic fans, especially, just because of the intimate nature of reading a comic book. So you can't worry about pleasing everybody. I think you do your homework. You understand the characters as best as you can, the versions that appeal to you, that you feel are honoring everything that came before, and then you just let them have fun. Like that. Like, for me, like Hal and Barry, like, I did a Flash annual that did like the New 52 the first time they ever met. One of my favorite things I ever did at DC, because it was like fun, and like they were like having had banter and talking shit to each other, and so I knew when I was doing Justice League, I was like, I'm going to get Hal and Barry in there because I want to do that. I knew that I wanted to put Green Arrow on Monster Island. I knew that I wanted to have Supergirl interact with Kong. And I wanted Grodd, to interact with Kong. Like, there's all these things that I knew that I wanted to happen, and they present really cool opportunities. I also wanted to play into the idea of, like, villains. One of the reasons why they never succeed is that they can't get along. They don't like each other, and like there's power dynamics, so it's playing into that stuff too. So I think you try to understand the characters as best you can. You do your research. You make sure you've tried at least, and then you let your mind go.
That Green Lantern Flash crossover you mentioned is also a little bit of a fateful story in my past. My other main collaborator and I kind of got into making audio dramas together, and he's kind of taken that and ran with it. And yeah, we actually reached out and you sent us the script for that annual, and we never finished that audio drama, but that was kind of what gave us the practice of figuring out how to adapt a comic to an audio drama script, and then finding all those weak points of where a comic just doesn't work in a one-to-one adaptation. And now he's writing...
relying on visuals.
Yeah. He's writing original audio dramas. He's figured out how to work around those when he does want to make an adaptation. So yeah, he's got an upcoming one. Cool. I'll make sure to send your way once it's out. But yeah, so thank you for helping us out so much in the creative process.
Yeah, man, of course.
But on the canon and playing with that with these characters, I noticed that you have this crossover set in a kind of unique place with a lot of the characters. Superman and Lois aren't married, but the whole Bat family is there. Wally West is running around as Kid Flash. So I'd kind of like to know how you go about deciding where you want these characters to be when you have free reign like this on the story. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's clearly in Elseworlds because they're not going to put Godzilla, Kong, and they're not going to put them on Prime Earth. That's just not going to happen, right? That would upset too many things they're already having in the unit. There's just the fact that it's in Elseworlds made it easy, right? Because I don't have to worry about where Superman is and Lois is in that Earth, because this is its own Earth. It's going to in success maybe it'll get its own number. Who knows? I don't know. But for me, it was just. I was given, the honor of writing this book. And so I just chose the versions of characters that I wanted. And yes, if you look at the timelines, well, how come, Lois here but yet you've got Damian over here, and then you've got the new Teen Titans over here. My world, my version of the DC universe. And no one told me I couldn't do it. You know? It's I can't think of Superman and not think of Christopher Reeve. So that's the version inside my head when I write Superman, George Perez, new Teen Titans. That's my favorite version of the Titans. So of course I'm going to try to bring them in. And spoiler, that means that you probably will see Beast Boy before it's all over, take that where you want to take it.
Where we're going.
It's just, I don't know. I mean, I tried to take stuff that appealed to me. I'm a big fan of the characters, but I think a lot of times I'm a big fan of the most classic versions of the characters, the most iconic versions. So that's kind of what I pulled from. And I think part of the success, obviously beyond the fact that it's DC superheroes and the big monsters and Godzilla, that sells itself. But it could have been something that, had an issue or two and then nobody read it anymore. I think part of, and this could also be a lesson I learned from The Flash, is just to make it very accessible. You don't have to know anything about Godzilla or Kong beyond what is in the sort of out there in the ether. You don't have to know anything about the DC superheroes other than what everyone already knows about them. You can step into this and by and large read the thing and enjoy it. And I think that was very much something I wanted to do, and I think it's working.
So you've had kind of free reign with where to place this in the DC canon, but I know there are a lot of outside interested parties in this book between DC and Legendary and Toho. So have you also had a lot of mandates you've had to work around with this, or what's that been like?
Shockingly, not as many as you would think. There were certain characters I wanted to use that I couldn't use because contractually they weren't in the contract. So I could not do that, right?
So are we talking, Mothra and Rodan, the other famous monsters?
Yeah. So Camazotz, the bat creature that Batman takes down. I wanted that to be Rodan originally, because then I had another thing that was going to spin off of that I had to cut out, because once it was Camazotz, which makes sense. He's a bat creature, Legendary owns the rights to that character, which is why I was able to use that character, whereas Toho owns the rights to Rodan. And it just wasn't, it wasn't in the contract. There's no it wasn't you can't do it because we don't like you. It's just legal stuff that's above my pay grade, right? So there was those types of things, and then there's just certain certain characters have their caretakers, they're gatekeepers and they're caretakers, and they want to make sure that their characters are treated a certain way. So, that helps to dictate where a story can go. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody's gonna one punch Godzilla. It's just not gonna happen. You'll never see it in any medium that is licensed. It's just not gonna happen. He's the king of all monsters. Like, so you have to get that out of your head. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Someone, I know there were some people that didn't like how I treated Superman, where Godzilla got him. But I thought I set up a situation that made sense to me. Like, he was protecting Billy Batson, and the radioactive nature of what Godzilla is had the similar effect to kryptonite. Like, that was enough for me, But there are people out there that are very, very protective of Superman. It's like everyone, gets upset whenever he is not perfect. But I would also argue those stories aren't interesting. Superman comes in and regulates and wins. Where's the drama in that? If there's no threat to him, how is he? How is that interesting? You have to find ways. Challenge him emotionally, challenge him. Give him like a no-win situation, or put him up against somebody who is equal. You know what I mean? Like, and there's something called like power levels that I learned, because I had some people like tweet at me about like power levels and what Earth is it? Is he prime? I didn't know what they were talking about. But there's like people have like this scale, of power, and it's like, are you about the story, or are you just about like rating systems? Like, I don't even understand it. Like, that's not really my thing. I responded that no, my Superman is as powerful as Prime Superman, but they gave me all the reasons why he's not. I'm like, okay.
Now, I'm starting to see that in media that, like, yeah, there are these people obsessed with power levels, and also people willing to cater to that, like, especially in modern anime. Like, I know when, like, later Dragon Ball stuff, it's like every 5 to 10 episodes, the main character's getting a new hair color because everyone's just so obsessed with the new form that's only slightly different than the last. And yeah, that's never been what I came for.
And also, I'm older, right? Like, I don't have that attachment to anime that other people do. Like, my son loves it. He's 23 years old. Like, One Piece, the whole thing. He's trying to get me to watch Attack on Titan, whatever it is. Like, it just never really appealed to me in the same way as like American storytelling. It just never did. For me growing up, it was like Speed Racer, Battle of the Planets. Like, that was kind of my exposure to anime. And then like Fist of the North Star and whatever movies that came out in the 90s. But
have you heard anything about Chainsaw Man?
Yeah, I've seen the dolls and the images and cons, and I know people who really like Chainsaw Man. Yeah.
I mean, that was my gateway to manga, and I only bring it up since, like, okay, if Radiant Black is the millennial superhero and Ruben from Midlife is like the Gen X superhero, like, I think Chainsaw Man is kind of a comparable version of like the, I don't know, Gen Z or
Z?
Yeah. And I think it's one of the most accessible for American comic fans. Like, it worked on me for sure. So I'd say give it an episode or two. I think you'd dig it.
All right. The only thing that I successfully watched that I loved was Blue Eye Samurai, but that was like a American storytellers.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It counts.
Like, I loved it, but I also wish that it was live action. It was so good. I was like, man, I wish it was live action. But that's just me. I'm not the audience for anime.
So, having gone from working on licensed titles for so long to now doing a number of indie books, like, have you had to really reformat your like scripting or writing brain for this, or has it been pretty natural for you writing on like Midlife and Chicken Devil?
Yeah, I don't think it's any different. The thing is, like, I taught myself how to write, right?
Yeah.
So like over like the course of 8 to 10 years, I wrote scripts for myself that nobody read, that were terrible and got less and less terrible until they were decent and then finally good. So like, I'm used to creating worlds and creating my own characters and seeing it through. So doing create your own things from, Sons of Devil, Cannibal, Chicken Devil, Midlife, No One. It's just a different side of the creative brain, right? It allows you to create a world, which is fun. It's fun and interesting to be able to do that. But I don't think it's different. I just think it flexes different muscles. I think there's like an ego component because you're the one that's creating it. You're not beholden to anyone. So like, that's really awesome and fun. But also, it's still fun to write, Godzilla versus Superman. Like, come on, like, they're just different. You can have chocolate cake or vanilla cake. You can have tres leches. You can have whatever. Like, it's all good.
Now, on Midlife, I was curious, like, obviously the book is centered around someone that's now 50 and getting into the superhero life, but I was curious if throughout, like, the story's inception, if it was always focusing on the character finding their powers at 50, or if any version of the story, like, this was a character that had been aware of his powers for a while and was, like, now we're just seeing them at 50.
No. I mean, this was conceived, like literally conceived to be a hero at 50. It's somewhat, biographical in that the whole setup for Ruben and his impetus to do something courageous. I mean, the pitch for those who haven't read Midlife. Ruben is a 50-year-old firefighter whose father was this hero firefighter who died in the line when he was a kid. And so he felt he had to live up to his father's legacy, becomes a firefighter, but he's deathly afraid of fire. So he's been a desk jockey for 25 years. He was married, had a kid. His kid's, an adult now. And he's got on his second wife. And on his 50th birthday, he finds out that he's going to have another child. And so I had, my second child at 50. So that was autobiographical. Feeling, being Gen Xers are like, we're very sort of reflective, like there's melancholy generation or whatever. Looking back at your life and always wondering, like, did I do enough? Did I try hard enough? Where did I go wrong? Like, could I have been more than what I am? Like, no matter where you are on the spectrum, I don't think that changes, like, I'll never think that I've accomplished as much as I want to accomplish. And so looking back on life, it was like a natural fit to create a character who was going through some of the things that I think I went through. And that came on the heels of doing Chicken Devil, which was, not autobiographical, except for the impetus for Chicken Devil was, what would happen if the Russian mob killed my family, Brian, and I wanted to get revenge? I have no special skills. Like, I'm not former, CIA. I was never, a Green Beret. I'm just a dude who doesn't know how to shoot a gun. How would I get revenge? Like, that was literally the pitch for Chicken Devil. And I had such a great experience writing it because I was like putting my part of myself in it, just like a regular guy in this extraordinary circumstances who fails upwards. And I was able to flex like sort of the comedic side of my writing, my personality that I think I do more now than I did, but like always writing like serious superhero stuff and writing like horror type, comics. Like I never really wrote about like the goofy side of my taste and my personality. So it was feeding into that. So coming off of that, I wanted to do a follow-up, create our own. And so it just got me thinking about heroism and talking to Kyle and him telling me, all about Radiant Black. And I'm like, yeah, Kyle's millennial. He's like one of my closest friends in LA, but he's a millennial. He's not Gen X. And so I was like, well, if he's going to do a millennial superhero, I'm going to do a Gen X superhero. And so that's really how it all happened.
No, I've been liking it so far, and I can definitely see that level of like the autobiography in there. Like there's a certain level of realism that feels so true to life. Like I remember the conversation Ruben has with his daughter in the car about France invading Mexico, like felt very much like a conversation I would have with one of my nieces and nephews.
Oh,
so
it was almost verbatim the conversation I had with her.
Okay.
Like if I could have dictated it when it happened, that's the only way it would have been more accurate. So that was my recollection of a conversation with she was probably 4 at the time, when I had that conversation with her.
Okay, I knew that had to come from real life. That was too weird and specific.
Yes, absolutely.
But I have to say my favorite character of the book so far is probably Ruben's wife. Like, I love this depiction of like someone who's supportive in an unbelievable situation, but also like ready to cut a bitch, and like a nurse that's willing to use her nursing ability as like both treatment and torture at the same time. Like, I just loved her in issue 4, and I'd like to know a little bit about the real world inspiration behind the character.
Oh, I mean, my wife Sharon, she's a nurse. I think she's ready to cut a bitch.
Every nurse I've ever met is ready for that.
She's just, she's tough and she's understanding. And I actually had a conversation with her at one point. I was like, I presented the circumstances of Ruben to her. I was like, what would you do in this situation? And she was like, well, I'm with you. I'm ride or die. So I'll just have to accept it. I was like, really? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, that just struck me because, I mean, that goes against like every wife, girlfriend, significant other depiction, hero's partner. Like, and I was like, okay. I mean, I didn't want it to be an antagonistic relationship to begin with, but like when she said that, I felt like I had license to just lean into that.
Yeah, I was very relieved to see it not go the struggling marriage route because of this like new secret or new change in life. So that's awesome.
We've seen that so many times.
Yeah.
There was like this weird trend in the TV shows where like the wife of all the anti-hero characters were all like so unlikable, and they all like leave the husband at like the end of season 1 or season 2. Like I had enough of that.
Yeah.
How about someone supporting?
The public was also like really hostile toward them too. Like they totally looked past the fact that like, hey, Walter White is literally a meth dealer. Can we forgive his wife for walking away from him? Jeez.
That's a big one. I think the Shield, the wife in the Shield, also was another one that wasn't real understanding, and but he also, you know, he was a dirty cop who killed one of his cops in the very first episode. So
yeah,
maybe she had it right all along.
But I'm curious on the realm of like real world heroism inspiring the book. Like you put out the call at the end of issue 2 for like finding out what that looks like to people. And I'm curious if like, I mean, we're seeing the firefighter influence and like treating the hero as, like a first responder rather than a cop with superpowers. And I've noticed a kind of shift in media towards that now. And I'm loving that. And like, I'm curious with your wife being a nurse, if like kind of the medical professionals or medical responders, if like that's influenced the way you want to take your depiction of heroism going forward.
I don't think I thought about it that deeply, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I think that just naturally happened. And then there's also a very practical reason why it happened. My wife's sister, she married a firefighter, LAFD. And they had a kid at 50, which happened like right on the time. I mean, it happened like I guess a year and a half after Libby was born. But when it, just felt like it was in the air. It was like, he was turning 50, having a kid, and like I had a kid at 50, and he was a firefighter. So I just thought it was a great setup. I don't know, like it wasn't more than that, and then plus I was able to talk to him about, as sort of like a consultant, to try to be as authentic as I could, not ever having been a firefighter, like all the jargon in the book is from him. Like when they were just speaking when they were talking about fires and stuff like that, I had like, hey, can you tell me how would they say this? So it just was in the air, but I actually appreciate the sort of seeing that because it wasn't necessarily intentional, but seeing the sort of straying away from like cop superhero to first responder. That's not something I thought deeply about, but I'm glad that it went that way, to be honest with you. I think there's enough, my friend would call it propaganda. I'm not like quite that against it. Obviously, I wouldn't have created a police character as his best friend. One of my oldest friends in New Jersey is a detective named Sean. So like needing no inspiration for that guy. So more autobiographical aspects.
Something on like a technical level I'm curious about. So we're seeing that Ruben's powers of so far just being demonstratively fireproof and having some kind of additional resistance with that, like as a defense mechanism that'll melt a bullet if it has to. Will we ever get any kind of explanation on Ruben's lungs? Or like
there's no direct. There is an explanation for it, but it's not like a medical explanation. It's like a genetic explanation for it.
Okay. All right. So we don't need to get into why the smoke inhalation isn't a problem or anything like.
Yeah. Right.
All right. I was just going to be, I was going to love it if he could we find out he can breathe underwater as a totally unrelated power. Cause he clearly has super lungs.
Yeah, he does have super lungs.
But,
or genetically different lungs. Yeah.
So as far as your other creator-owned work, so like Chicken Devil and Midlife, you're kind of at the helm writing those, but I know you're working as co-writer on No One alongside Kyle Higgins, and I'm curious how that like affects your creative process. Like you've described writing as like creative problem solving, so is it just two heads tackling the same problems, or like what do you both bring to the table when writing?
Yeah, I think when you're in the blue sky phase, I think it's two heads tackling your problem. Mm-hmm. Like when you're talking out what it is and how cool it is, and wouldn't it be great if, and what about this character, and how do when you're like up here, it's definitely that. But I think what happens is it ends up settling into, you kind of find natural lanes. Like if you're the guy who's I'm the snappy dialogue guy, then that's your lane. If you're the guy, I come up with all the big moves, and or if I'm the mystery guy, and I'm figuring out all the different shades of whodunit and the red herrings and how this happened. Like, I think you just find your natural places if you have a good writing partner. You know what I mean? Then you're not, butting heads. I've had some good writing partners. Like my experience with Francis is really good. I think we understood where our strengths were, and we let that play out the way it would play out. I think it's the same thing here. I mean, there's overlap. I think Kyle and I like a lot of the same things, so there's definitely synergy because there is some overlap. But I mean, I write faster than Kyle. I think that's one asset that I have. He tends to think outside the box in a way. Like, how do we take something and flip it on its ear in a way, like where the podcast, the concept of the podcast came straight from Kyle. All this AR, augmented reality stuff to go with it, with the articles and this and that, and the Unreal Engine video, like footage of no one. Like that's, I think that's part of what makes Kyle really great as a creator and as a creative mind. I'm a little more nuts and bolts. Like for me, the big appeal is how do I deconstruct this series of murders and make everything line up and hopefully stick the landing. Like that was really hard. Like we wrote for a year before we ever put pen to page in terms of like page one, panel one. Like I have a slideshow document that's like over 100 slides long with the characters and this and that and this, like the murderers and also the kind of stuff that we just built over the course of a year. That said, it's the hardest thing, I think. We probably both admit it's the hardest thing.
Yeah, I saw Kyle building hype for it quite a while beforehand. Like C2E2's Radiant Black event, he had the cutout that he was being really shifty about when people would ask, who is that? Oh, that's no one. And like towards the end of the night, he brings everyone. He's like, okay, this is a big secret. This is what we're working on for our next book. And just built all this mystery around it. And it, definitely got me excited for the eventual release.
Yeah, we have 2 more issues to go. Hopefully we'll stick landing. I know it's not on schedule, but sometimes that's hard in the real world, especially a book that's this dense. It's not it's not an easy breezy reading, right? Like there's a lot of characters from the get go. The appeal for me is like, let's do our version of The Wire and set it in a superhero city with a vigilante. It's like The Wire meets Gotham Central, meets maybe like Batman or Daredevil, and then we add the extra step of, but you don't know who the vigilante is, and you never get a privileged point of view of no one. That would be the added caveat, which made it more like, I think, Gotham Central. It just made it interesting. It made it an interesting challenge, and obviously the concept lended itself to that. The idea of no one. He's called no one because it doesn't matter who he is, right? He could be anyone. He's no one. That was kind of the initial conceit.
Now, my last guest on the show was actually Matt Groom, and he mentioned doing some work on that podcast. So, I'm curious if there's sort of a third writing mind in the room when it comes to that, or does Kyle more handle the, interweaving of the podcast with the comic?
No. I mean, it was Kyle and myself. We had outlines, so it was like, this is what this episode's about. This is, these are the things that has to hit. And then within that, there's some freedom, obviously, to bring your own, stuff to the table, but you can't really let a third person come in and freelance in something that's so structurally specific, right? Like these murders happened here because of this, with this person, there's just, it's too rigid. So it was more about, hey, we need to finish these scripts by a certain time because they have to be recorded by we had to record all 10 episodes before the 4th issue was written, So it's like we had to decide, and that's another thing that's scary. We had to decide because there's no going back. Like there's no re-recording the episodes. So like we had to make some fucking ballsy calls before, while we were still in the thick of the first, third of the, first less than halfway in. So
now, as far as more experimental works you've been on now, but with both with the ARG on No One, and I'm especially curious about the DC Direct or interactive media project I've heard you mention elsewhere.
Yeah, so that's my day job. It is an interactive series. It was announced, I think, at New York Con, or we had a panel in New York Con. I think it was announced in San Diego, and then New York Con we had a panel. And it's sort of like the cross between like an animated series, like with like sort of the CG from that you would get like a video game cutscene, which, I guess they're very similar nowadays. It's not traditional animation, obviously, but it's like a cross between like a half-hour animated series and sort of like a choose your own adventure telltale game kind of thing, where the characters, a question will pop up, or multiple questions in an episode will pop up, and then you have like a week to vote on what path these characters are going to take. So it's like, Superman, is he going to punch Batman, kick Wonder Woman, or hug Lex Luthor? That's obviously oversimplification.
Yeah.
But so then you open it up to the users, the audience, and they vote on what they want to happen. And so they have a week to vote on it, and then when the next episode airs, like before it airs, it locks in, and those choices are what play out. So you're directly controlling the fate of the characters. Is Lex Luthor going to join the Justice League? Is he going to be a villain? Is this person going to be in the Justice League? Like all these things. It's choices on how characters treat each other that determine what happens. So it's like putting the power in the hands of the. There's the nurse that I was talking about.
Hey.
Putting the power in the hands of the audience, and there's some subtlety to it, but it's fun, and hopefully people will really respond to that, because in comics, like there's so much canon, and people always have an opinion on whatever choice you make. Well, in this case, the community's going to decide. So it's not like in like the Walking Dead game where you make the choice. If you don't like it, you can back out and go back in and make a new choice. This becomes canon in this world. This is Earth 212, I believe, is the Earth for DC, and so it's going to be up to the audience to decide what's going to happen.
So, like, some of the audience decisions get like undone for the questions throughout the episode, or like, do they get multiple paths to choose from in each episode, or is it just like one or two?
So yes, yeah. So like, I think right now we're talking about like four. It's like four major choices, right, per episode, and each choice has A, B, or C, like the Trinity, and so each one of those things is going to affect, like somebody's going to be happy about it, someone's not going to be happy about that choice, like, so there's no right answer in any of the cases, really. It's just about like relationships. So it's like Superman might be happy if you do this, but Wonder Woman's not going to like it, and Lex might be ambivalent or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so that creates how these characters view each other, and then at the end of it all, like all the choices that were made are going to lead to the other characters deciding what they're going to do because of all the choices and the ways that they were treated, and all the choices that the users made.
So, like, will there be a like animation that we'll never get to see the light of day if the audience voting is happening, like, to decide these?
Yeah, we've got to record the dialogue, and they've got to make the animations, because it has to be done. You have 1 week, and so we've got to do all three versions. Got to write all three versions. Got to record all three versions. Got to produce all three versions. So you're not going to see like destroy Mars, destroy the moon, or go to Atlantis, because production-wise, you can never pull that off. So you try to do like emotional, character-based decisions that don't blow your budget. You know what I mean?
Okay.
That you could actually execute. I mean, that it's because I don't know that you could execute like that much variance. And I think people don't want that anyway. They want to see the soapy. They want the character relationship soapy stuff. That's what people always respond to more than anything. It's what happens between the punches.
Now, as a last experimental topic I wanted to get into is kind of a question of the week here. Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong had its roaring variant cover issue. That like we hear Godzilla's roar as we open the first page, and I'm curious if you could do that same effect in any other comic you've worked on. How would you want to put that technology to use?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I mean, would you have Batman say like "I'm Batman," or would you hear like the snicked sounds from Wolverine? I don't know.
I mean, I feel like there's so much potential to use this for good, but really more so for evil with this, especially as like a horror thriller writer. Like, I mean, just having like not even an immediate page turn, but if just like 3 minutes after you open the book, it screams at you. Or you could gaslight people, like, because if no one knows they bought a talking issue, no one's going to assume that a comic book is actually talking to them. So like, you could just start saying things and they'll think they're hearing voices.
That's hilarious. I think you're onto something. Maybe you should see if you can't monetize that. That's pretty fun. I also want to tell you that I listened to your podcast that you sent me. But
Oh yeah, the Morphin Time episode.
Yeah, sure did. Very, very, very interesting, man. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Like, on kind of that note of what heroism looks like in the real world, I wanted to send that your way just as like, okay, in my life, in the most difficult night of my life, I did not have the right person there next to me to like kind of talk me down. And I've had some like not as extreme, but similar experiences later where there's been someone that's frankly a better writer and storyteller next to me, since my girlfriend's a bit of a novelist, and like having that ability to talk someone down, or like they're having this huge ideas of like, what if the universe is just love and storytelling? Like, okay, well, what if it is? We can talk this down. We can rationalize things.
Sure.
And like, I feel like heroism in the real world often, like, it isn't just saving people in danger, but it's more reassuring people that they can save themselves, like throwing them the life preserver rather than jumping in after them.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like a crazy trip type of talking someone down. You can talk somebody down from quitting their job hastily because they're upset, or doing something rash, or you know what I mean, like, or making an action motivated by an emotion that potentially could be harmful. You know, there's so many different ways. It doesn't have to always be, you know, pulling people out of burning buildings, or you know, anything like that. I mean, I wouldn't say it's heroism exactly, but just the simple fact that Francis thought of me to write Flash and changed the course of my life, right? And like that's like, you know, in some ways that was a heroic act of heroism towards me, you know, like definitely benevolence. But I mean, I felt like I earned my way. It's not like it was just a gift that I used, you know, like we both benefited from it, but like he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to open up his sort of his heart and his creative opportunity to me, you know.
Wow, what a beautiful way to tie that right into the first question of the show there, Brian.
That's almost like I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I did not intend that, though, I'll tell you that.
But Brian, for those of our listeners that want to continue following your work, especially on future books, where can they find you online? I
mean, I'm on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Brian Bucc. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Brian Bucc is spelled phonetically, so it's like BrianBooch. So I'm there.
Well, thank you again for making the time to come on the show. I've really had a great time talking to you, and
same.
Good luck with the last few issues of literally all 3 of your main books coming out. I'm excited to see how these turn out.
Yeah, fair enough. Hope you like it. Let me know what you think of it.
Will do. But if the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for content you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Size Violence Facebook page or on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast. Or you can email us at giantsizeviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to artists Radio Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music this week is You Are an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. You can find their new EP, Shut Up, Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again as we continue to explore the world of Tokusatsu comics, but until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze up till you're 10 feet tall and shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to try or let them make you small, cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall.